Thank you to the Economic Times HR World Conference for inviting me to speak today on a winning talent strategy, road to recovery, post-pandemic and beyond. Never in the history of corporate shareholder value created has it been clearer that human value is more important than economic value. This is the lesson of COVID-19 pandemic, says Ram Charan. Because without healthy people, economic value creation becomes nearly impossible, as we have seen businesses and industries implode. This crisis will be remembered as a humanitarian crisis of a scale that we hopefully will never see in our lifetime. But companies need to be prepared. People have been through situations like this before: the Great Depression, World War I, and World War II, to name a few. And yet some companies emerged well and built an enduring enterprise throughout future decades and generations, despite wars, depression, and the effects of time. As we know from these other major crises over many centuries, the greatest asset the organization has for overcoming the crisis is people. Organizations will be judged by how they treat their people, their customers, and their community during and after the crisis. For some organizations, near-term survival is the only agenda item, while others are peering through the fog of uncertainty, thinking about how to position themselves once the crisis has passed and things return to normal. The question is, what will normal look like? While no one can say what the new normal will look like, or how long the crisis will last, or will we have another flare up, we know what we find on the other side will not look like the normal of recent years. So, what is the future of the workforce, work, and workplace? Digitalization started well before the pandemic, but the pandemic accelerated digitalization of many processes, resulting in a change in the way people work. What we are seeing is change in every facet: the workforce, the work, and the workplace. Those organizations that are coping with the challenges and embracing their employees, their customers, and their community lead the charge to recovery. And the lessons we learn from the crisis and the others preceding it will help us deal with the next one. Let's look at the workforce, the future of hybrid workforce. According to a McKinsey study of over 100 respondents at the C-suite and VP level based in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and the US, 9 out of 10 organizations in the post-pandemic future of work will be combining remote work and on-site work. The survey confirms that productivity and customer satisfaction have increased during the pandemic. The survey also confirms that during the pandemic, most organizations saw an increase in individual and team productivity and employee engagement, leading to increased customer satisfaction. Despite the embrace of a hybrid model for the last year, most organizations have recently started to think on the specifics as to how to carry out a remote and on-site working environment. Many employees are extremely anxious about returning to work, while others feel they're missing out on peer interaction. Others are concerned about childcare or grieving from the loss of a loved one. The sustainability of this model will be dependent on how leaders address the anxiety level and possible burnout of employees. Who are the emerging vulnerable leaders? They are the leaders who make the small connections. Organizations enjoying greater gains in productivity attributed to leaders who support the small connections, between colleagues, opportunities to discuss projects, share ideas, network, listen, and coach, for example. The days of the macho leaders is gone. Most all managers recognize that leading on-site workers is different from leading remote workers. Leaders coping with this crisis are those who reflect a level of vulnerability and empathy and an acceptance of the fact that we don't have all the answers. They support the small moments of connectivity, and this requires a different mindset. Organizations that are at the leading edge and have higher productivity invest in training their leaders to lead teams effectively in a hybrid work environment. They understand the positive and negative impact leaders have on their employees, and they respond with empathy. Needless to say, managers need to communicate with employees under any circumstances. But during a crisis like the pandemic, the need for clear and frequent communication is more intense and a must. Leadership has to be thought of in a new light, though. Besides being an empathetic communicator and being action driven under the changing times, a leader needs to manage ambiguity. That is what sets a true leader apart, as no one has all the answers and situations change frequently. As I mentioned, digitalization started well before the pandemic, but the pandemic accelerated digitalization of many processes, resulting in a change in the way people work. The need to review and change the work and the processes has increased as organizations are moving in greater numbers to a hybrid workforce. Organizations with higher productivity levels tend to follow the principles of continuous improvement, continually making necessary changes to the work to accommodate changes in the workplace. For example, leaders need to reimagine hiring, a key process impacted by the pandemic. Organizations, for the most part, have developed the remote recruiting process and onboarding process. However, organizations are ambivalent about recruiting. Should they recruit geographically or expand their horizon and recruit outside their area? This goes back as to how they will manage their remote workers. Many workers will not want to return to the office. This is apparent in the large numbers of women leaving the workforce to care for their children as childcare facilities have closed and or they have seen the benefits of being a stay-at-home mom. Organizations need to rethink how to reward and compensate employees. Should the compensation be based on a national level, irrespective of where the employee works on site, or have a different compensation for on site workers and another one for remote workers? The impact of different compensation structures creates its own issues when organizations are faced with employees leaving the organization to avoid a reduction in their pay. On another note, the number of startups handling wellness, mental health, mindfulness is a clear indication of what's happening with the mental health crisis. This issue existed to some extent, and organizations responded by providing things like gym memberships and the like. But the pandemic has brought mental wellness up and front and center, and organizations are grappling with the severity of this. Organizations are providing it as a separate benefit or incorporating it with their employee assistance programs. Leaders must recognize this and be empathetic. As mentioned, digitalization, artificial intelligence has changed the where we work, only accelerated by the pandemic. Organizations would need to look at reskilling employees with their technical skills, but also upskilling their skills to be more resilient and work with ambiguity. So, what does this all mean? As we know from other major crises over hundreds of years, the greatest asset for overcoming any crisis is the people and the leadership. Organizations after this pandemic is over will be judged by how well they treated their people, their customers, and their community. David Noor, in his book, Healing the Wounds, based on his research with companies forced to administer layoffs, focuses on actions that more successful organizations took to set the stage for a quick recovery while retaining and motivating those who survived and held on to their jobs. He concluded that successful organizations first processed intervention. They involved employees in decisions and over-communicated information and made themselves visible for employees to ask questions. Second was grieving interventions, where leaders needed to help employees express their sense of loss. Third, leaders need to engage employees in developing strategies for recovery rather than offering solutions that are met with lukewarm acceptance. Fourth and last, he called it systems intervention, where leaders redesign organizations to be flatter, provide greater empowerment, and to move to a more flexible workforce. Recovery will depend on the capacity of creative leaders to define a compelling new vision for the organization, go through a similar process of processing interventions, and swiftly implement new business models. As a result of COVID, experts expect the compelling new vision of many future sensing organizations to be less about growth and more on solutions that address planetary sustainability and the broader well-being of humanity. The following lines in closing from Tom Peters in A Passion for Excellence states this well. When conditions change, new standards must be met, new skills learned, new roles taken, old records broken. Thank you very much and have a wonderful conference.